good evening, and welcome to Straight Up No Chaser, where the word of God is raw and going to the nations. Listen, tag somebody, share, call somebody, let them know that Straight Up No Chaser midweek edition is on. It's Wednesday evening at 6:30, and we are doing a special edition, midweek editions throughout, starting today and throughout the month of March. And so let somebody know that we are on, and we're going to get ready to jump into um, some insights and some information regarding addiction. And particularly, we're going to talk about marijuana and the brain this evening. So gird up, get ready. We are the people of God, and we need to be informed. Um, there have been times in my life when I thought, I wish somebody had told me about this when I was younger, or I wish some responsible adult would have, warned me. But, I look back and I realized that there were some warnings, but then for the most part, the things that I encountered, um, some of the adults in my life just simply didn't have the answers and just simply didn't know. And so we, as responsible adults and the people of God, we are responsible to teach the generations coming behind us. The scriptures tell us that the older women are to teach the younger women. And so if we're going to teach, we have to learn. We have to get information and insight so that we can share it with the next generation. So today, our topic is, what's the big deal about marijuana? And I just want to share some insight, and information that will help you to help the youth in your church and in the world. Because if you have some information, you can share it. They might not take your advice, but that's okay. You gave it to them, and it will reside with them, and eventually it may come back to the forefront. I want to pose a question to you all today, especially those of you who are leaders in the body of Christ, who are leaders and especially pastors. Um, if if there were 25 adolescents mandated by the court to attend your church as part of fulfillment of their probationary period for using marijuana and driving under the influence, or getting in some trouble when marijuana was in their system, if they were mandated to your church by the courts, 25 adolescents, and they're all marijuana smokers who are not interested in stopping the smoking of marijuana. They came because the court sent them, not because they want to be there. See, and I posed that question because in the substance abuse arena, and that's the arena that I work in. I'm a substance abuse professional as well as a minister of the gospel. And in that arena, many clients are stipulated to go to treatment. They don't want to be there. But what they get there is education. They get insight, and they get to make informed decisions about their drug use, whereas before coming there, they didn't have the information. And so I ask you, if 25 adolescents were mandated by the courts to attend your church, they're all marijuana smokers who do not want to stop smoking. When you talk to them about getting delivered, they respond with, "What's the big deal about marijuana?" They go on to say it's legal and it's just a herb. What is your response to that? Because now you have someone who is not a willing candidate for deliverance. How many times have you laid hands on and prayed for an individual to stop using drugs, and they came right back smelling like a skunk next Sunday? And you prayed for them, you prayed the prayer of faith, and they are still smoking. They're not willing to stop. They're not ready to stop. They're not willing to put forth the effort But what if educating them, giving them some insight and some understanding about the impact of marijuana so that they can see the big deal about marijuana? And I am especially talking about adolescents today. As we get into the lesson that the Lord has given me, I'm especially talking about adolescents because we owe it to the generations coming behind us to share information that may change the trajectory of their lives. And so y'all hanging here with me. We got to deal with this hungering and this thirst that is driving so many. Myself, I was one of those who I was driven to use drugs and alcohol to try to address a hungering and a thirst that is a natural human condition. God designed us to hunger and thirst, but not after the things of this world, but to hunger and thirst after righteousness that we shall be filled. And so we're going to go to one of our supporters, and then we'll be right back with you to talk about what's the big deal about marijuana. So while we're on break, call somebody, share, like, let somebody know that we are live, straight up, no chaser. Y'all can talk to me in the comments. I will be able to see your comments, and I will respond as best I can to your comments. So um, hang in here with us, and we will be right back. One. Here we go. All right. So we are back with Straight Up No Chaser. What's the big deal about marijuana? What's the big deal about marijuana? Marijuana and the brain. It's something that's some of what I want to talk about this evening. So listen, y'all bear with me. Got a lot going on here. I hope you can see the screen. In 1956, the American Medical Association formally identified addiction as a disease because addiction is describable. It can be described like other diseases. The illness is predictable, it's progressive, and the disease is primary. That is, it's not just a symptom of some other underlying disorder, it is permanent. So what does that mean to us as we think about um, the disease of addiction being permanent? I have been free from the use of crack cocaine and alcohol for 31 years. It'll be 32 years, the Lord willing. It'll be 32 years in March, and God has been good to me. But I'm gonna tell you something. What I realize is that he didn't deliver me from the use of drugs and alcohol just to fix me so that I could do it recreationally without it having adverse effects. And so when we talk about the disease of addiction, let's bear in mind that a person can be abstinent and be in the recovery process, but they're never able to use drugs successfully without it taking over. And so it's important that we realize that, and that addiction, like other diseases, is terminal. If left untreated, it results in insanity or premature death. And so having said that, um let's look at some more facts. And I know this is not like your exciting or have you on the edge of your seat type of thing that we're used to coming across the pulpit. But this is some information that's needed for the body of Christ. If we are going to be laborers that are prepared to um, deal with the harvest, the scripture says that the harvest is ripe, but the laborers are few. Pray ye to the Lord of the harvest that he prepare laborers, that he send out laborers. And part of our preparation, when we talk about building capacity, a capacity building strategy, people of God, is that we are informed. So when the harvest comes in with addictions, we will be ready to help them, to give them the help we can, to send them where they can get more help, so that we will be prepared. We want to be prepared to labor with the harvest. And many of the harvest that the Lord is going to send in to the church, the church is going to needs to be prepared to be the answer to the dilemma, so that the Lord can send in the harvest and we can work with the harvest because we are prepared laborers. And so some of the characteristics of addiction is transferable. The problem is the disease itself. And so the disease resides. Listen, I am a living testimony that when I stopped using drugs, I started to try to fill that void with food. And then I gained 100 pounds in a year. And then I started trying to fill that void with relationships, going from relationship to relationship, trying to satisfy an inner void. It's a human condition. That thirst and that hunger is a human condition, but we are to thirst after the Lord and thirst after his righteousness, and then all things will be added unto us. However, who told us? Who knew? As children growing up, who knew? Who actually knew that we were supposed to hunger and thirst after righteousness, that we could be filled? And so we find ourselves hungering and thirsting after so much, so many other things in the world, only to not be fulfilled at all. Only to not be fulfilled at all. And so we're talking today about becoming prepared laborers, so that if God were to send 25 adolescents mandated by the courts to attend our church as part of their probationary period, we would be prepared to help them and give them some information. And so in looking at addiction being transferable, addiction is also chronic. It increases in severity over time and is progressive. It moves from early stages of pleasure to uncontrollable craving stages. And so when we talk about uncontrollable craving stages, um, but not at the beginning. It's recreational use at first. And we're still talking about what's the big deal about marijuana. It's recreational use initially, and then we move on to misuse, where it begins to interfere with daily activities. And this may take years, or it may happen very quickly. For the adolescent, it may happen very quickly, because one of the things that we'll look at is that the adolescent brain is 3 times more likely to get addicted than the adult brain. 80% of adjudicated detained youth test positive for drug use, and 60% of those positives are for marijuana. And what we know now is that some who have been using marijuana only also test positive for other drugs, because oftentimes the marijuana is laced with other drugs that heighten the effect of the marijuana and assures uh, um, the seller, or what we call them, even the entrepreneur, right, assures them that their product is so strong and so powerful that the person is sure to want to return and get theirs, right? And so when we look at our adolescents, what we see is recreational use. Um, Recreational use oftentimes moves pretty swiftly into chronic use um, for the adolescent. I see I got some folks watching with me. Um, and so not only the people who may be, and thank you for that comment, Carrie, not only for the people that may be sent to your church, but what about the adolescents in your family? Being able to share some insight. They don't want to hear it. They like, Granny, come on now. Here you go, Granny, with that. They don't want to hear it, but it is imperative that we tell our young people the truth. Again, there are things I've been faced with in life, and I have often said, I wish somebody had told me. I wish somebody had this insight. And I realized my grandmother did the best she could with what she was working with. My mother did the best she could with what she was working with. And I believe as we gather information, we should distribute it among ourselves so that we can be stronger and prepared to labor with our youth, whether it's in the family or in the church. All right, let's so I want you to see this. I'm gonna put this on the screen. Give me just a second. And so as we look at marijuana, as we look at it, and there are a few things that I want to touch on, but we might have to come back and talk about them at a part two. But recreational use, continual recreational use is unrealistic, because marijuana, just like any other addiction, is progressive. It moves from recreational use to misuse to abuse and to dependence. And so we need to be mindful of that. We need to be mindful that recreational use, it won't always be recreational use. Eventually, it's going to be misuse, abuse, and dependence, which is addiction. I know this is different and it's a lot, but it's needed. It is needed. All right, so let's move on. As we talk about, the scriptures tell us in 2 Peter 2:19 that a man is a slave to whatever controls him, and whatever we lend our members to, that becomes our master, and we become its slave. And so we as human beings were not designed to use substances to alter our mind and our mood, because the brain is conditioned to become addicted, dependent on those mood or mind altering chemicals. And then Romans 6:15, 16, Romans 6:16 says, don't you realize that whatever you choose to obey becomes your master? You can choose sin, which leads to death, or you can choose to obey God and receive his approval. And so God does not approve of us using anything other than him. There's a scripture in the book of Exodus that tells us that we shall have no other gods before him. In Exodus 34:14, you must worship no other gods, but only the Lord. What is worship? Worship is radical obedience, and perverted worship is addiction. And so, um, God, who is passionate about his relationship with us, says that we shall have no other gods, because he is a jealous God. He's jealous over us because he doesn't want anything else to have access to control us and take us in ways that where we will be hurt and harmed. And so, speaking about hurt and harm, speaking about hurt and harm, I want to talk about the brain. When we look at the adolescent brain, again, it is 3 times more likely to become addicted than a human brain. Carrie says people don't see the buildup is dependence until it's too late to stop. And that is so true. So if we can forewarn, if we can help them to see the progression so that as they're in the throes of the progression, they can at least have informed, they can be make informed decisions to say, you know what, I remember what was said, and I feel like that's what I'm doing right now. I do a workshop with adolescents on um, the cycle of addiction, right? And it starts with the belief system, and it moves beyond the belief system to eventually addiction. Well, in doing those groups, I've had children say to me, adolescents say to me, man, I can see exactly where I'm at, and I've seen that cycle happen in my life. When we tell someone, it's like going to the doctor and the doctor asks you what your symptoms are, or they tell you what the symptoms are of a certain illness, and then you realize I'm having some of those symptoms, and so you realize that you could very well be um, need to be checked out for this illness. But if no one ever tells you what the symptoms are, we got Google now, right? And so we go to Google, and when we go to Google, we look up what's going on with us, and we find sometimes we find stuff we shouldn't, and it scares us. But here I'm connecting, linking symptoms with behaviors that will help an individual see themselves going down that slippery slope before it's too late. We want to um, be the ones to blow the trumpet, to sound the alarm, to help people recognize that they're in trouble. I remember when I started using drugs, I didn't expect to get addicted. That didn't make sense. Why would I use drugs until I lost my children, or why would I use drugs until I lost my job? That type of thing. It just didn't make sense. Why would I do that? I knew better. I had better sense than that. I didn't know it was going to capture my brain. I didn't know it. So take a look here, the hijacked limbic reward system. Listen, in an adolescent, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for critical thinking. But in an adolescence, the prefrontal cortex, let me back up. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for critical thinking, but in an adolescence, it's not fully developed. And so, because it's not fully developed in an adolescent, they don't have the critical thinking abilities that adults should have. And so, the teen's brain relies on the limbic reward system, which is tied to rewards and emotions. So, whatever emotion feels good, that and gives them a reward, they want to continually repeat that behavior. Now, that limbic reward system operates that way in adults too. It's just that the adults have the prefrontal cortex to counteract and to be more likely to make responsible decisions because of critical thinking. But we have a generation now of young people that have a really hard time with critical thinking. And I would even venture to say two generations, the adolescents of today and the generation before them, which would be their parents. And if we look at that generation before their parents, would be my generation, a generation that was greatly impacted by the crack cocaine epidemic, and as a result was formed the biggest foster care system that we've ever seen, because grandparents and parents alike were so impacted by the crack cocaine epidemic that children were thrusted into the foster care system, because there was no one. Grandma was cracked out too, and so there was no one to pick up the slack when mom and dad dropped the ball in many cases. And with my children, my mother wasn't addicted to crack cocaine, but she had her own addictions, and she had her own lifestyle that she was not willing to give up to raise my children. And I don't regret that, because it was because of my children that their needs that pushed me into getting some help for myself, and getting free from crack cocaine and alcohol. And I went through a 12-step program, and I strongly suggest that churches not bash 12-step programs, but encourage people to get all the help that they can. Same thing with treatment. Encourage people to go to treatment, get the help that they need. They'll come back for their spirituality. They'll come back to the church and they'll come back better than when they left because they need insight and understanding. And so, as we look at this and we look at how the limbic reward system is impacted, the memory is impacted by marijuana use. It hijacks that system, that reward system. Emotions such as fear and anxiety are impacted. Their ability to make healthy decisions is impaired because they're not careful as they should be. It lowers their inhibitions, and the carefulness that would be there is not there anymore once they have ingested marijuana. The hypothalamus is affected. So this limbic reward system then, once we begin to talk about that, we can show how marijuana affects the brain. And for the adolescent, some of these changes can be permanent. Again, the brain of an adolescent is 3 times more likely to become addicted than the adult brain. And it's because it's not fully developed as of, during their adolescent years. And so these are some things that we need to know so that when the question is posed, so what's the big deal about marijuana? We can begin to talk to them about what that big deal is, how it impacts the physical brain. We're not talking about, oh, you don't need to be high, you need to be sober, you need to be stable. Yeah, that's true. But they're not hearing you when you talk about that because, listen, many times when you say to them that, they need to stop smoking so they can act normal. Oftentimes the response is, I've heard this response over and over again. Marijuana don't change me. Marijuana don't even change me. And that's not that doesn't even make sense when you think about, you buy it to alter your mind and your mood, to feel good, right? Because it's a feel good. Addiction is a feel good disease. You want to feel, it's a feelings disease. You want to feel good. You don't want to feel the realities of this world and this life. You want to escape, right? And for children, sometimes for young people, it's not even to that point yet, although many of our young people do have grown folk problems, especially in this day and age where they've been through the foster care system for many years, or since they were very young toddlers, and they have rejection issues and abandonment issues, and they do have grown folk problems, and they want to escape. They don't want to feel. And so when we look at the impact on the brain, it slows reaction time. And I've had adolescents tell me, I drive better when I'm high. No, you don't. Who's in the car with you that's telling you you drive better when you're high? Because your opinion don't count because you high. And so, and 9 times out of 10, if they smoking marijuana and they driving, anybody in the car with them is their partners that's smoking too. And to think I drive better when I'm high, that's unrealistic because the brain is so affected that it slows down reaction time. It's funny, I was doing group at the juvenile detention facility, and I asked them, if you were driving down the road, and you kind of going a little fast, but you felt like you were in control and everything, and a child runs out in front of you, and you go to hit the brake, but you don't hit the brake in time, and you hit this child, what part of your body would you say was the reason why you didn't hit the brake in time? And most adolescents say, my foot or my leg. They do not realize that it is the brain that sends the signal to the foot and the leg to move, and that marijuana slows down their reaction time. Let's take a quick break here. Y'all drop some questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer them. And we're going to take a quick break and go to one of our sponsors.
Straight Up No Chaser is proudly sponsored by Mary Lewis Willis, independent beauty consultant and designer, handkerchief manufacturer. For purchases, please contact Mary Lewis Willis at 248-991-4084.
All right, we had a little disturbance there. I'm going to run her commercial again. I want it right. Let's see if we can get it right this time.
Straight Up No Chaser is proudly sponsored by Mary Lewis Willis, independent beauty consultant and designer, handkerchief manufacturer. For purchases, please contact Mary Lewis Willis at 248-991-4084. All right, we are back. And listen, y'all not asking no questions. Drop some questions in the chat. In the meanwhile, I want to talk about the physical body and some of the impact. We've talked about the brain, how marijuana impacts the brain, the memory problems, the impaired judgment, the how it causes a dopamine release, and the brain becomes dependent on the marijuana in order to get that dopamine release, which is like happy chemicals, right? And the brain is designed so wonderfully by God that certain behaviors, for instance, our sexual interaction is supposed to release happy chemicals, so we'll want to repeat the behavior and populate the world, right? And so we're designed with that part of our body to work, the pleasure center. But when it's infiltrated by drugs, then what happens is it becomes dependent on the drug to release the dopamine, the happy chemicals. And when there's no drug to connect to in the receptors in the brain, then there's a sadness, and that person experience withdrawal until they get that release of those happy chemicals triggered by the use of the drug. And in this case, we're talking about marijuana. Um, and so increased depression is often associated with marijuana use. And then when we think about the lungs, right? Bronchitis, um, lung irritation, increased chances of lung cancer, because the body is ingesting something foreign. And just as nicotine is a problem, if we just sat up and smoked plain paper, it would affect the lungs. And so we see the increase of lung cancer, um, a weakened immune system anytime. And this, of course, is not, marijuana is not the only drug that weakens the immune system, but it's one of them. And young people need to know that, and be taught what the immune system is. you know um when I was doing group at the juvenile detention facility, I found that many of our youth did not even know that they had an immune system or what an immune system was. We have to educate. We have to teach. We have to educate so that they can make informed decisions, so that they'll know that in order for them to feel high, the brain is being impacted by the drug use. We have to educate. Um, and so, yeah, the doctors have science has said that marijuana has some medical advantages. It's not the THC of the marijuana that's being used for medical reasons. The THC is the ingredient that that causes one to feel euphoric and high. And so let me see if I have any comments, any questions on here. Carrie said depressed, and by the way, Carrie's my daughter. Um, she is a social worker. She has a master's degree, and she's a social worker, and she's built for this. It depresses the central nervous system, so people think it relaxes them. Then the body gets dependent on marijuana to relax. Yes, and I so often, in dealing with the youth, they're defensive, right? They want to defend this thing. Have you ever been connected to something, like something so much that you defend it when people start talking against it and telling you that this is what you need to give up? It's like, you you can have it might be something that you like to eat, and you kind of getting to see that every time you eat it, you feel sick. Like, I have had that issue, right? And I just don't want to believe that that's what it is, because I don't want to let it go. Well, in dealing with the adolescents, oftentimes they are they are defensive, of course, about their marijuana use. And so when I start talking about withdrawal, now mind you, these children are adjudicated, and they're in the detention facility. And so they've been there for a while. They haven't been able to use their drug of choice, marijuana, for a while. And so when I start talking about addiction, of course their response is, I'm not addicted, I've been in here all this time, I haven't had any. And I named some of the withdrawal symptoms, for so that they can have an idea of what that looks like. And one of the withdrawal symptoms is lack of appetite. And that usually is after I name all of the other withdrawal symptoms. That one right there usually gets them. It usually gets them because they don't have an appetite. And I ask them, so when you first got here, when you were first arrested, and you came to the detention facility, did you have an appetite? And they say, no, Miss Morgan, I didn't have an appetite, because your body has become dependent on marijuana to give you your appetite. Some of us can't get our day started and have a meal until we have some coffee and a cigarette. The body has become dependent. Uh, And so when we talk about dependence, we're talking about having built up a tolerance, needing to use more of the drug over time than than they did at the beginning. And so I asked this question: when you first started using drugs, did you use as much then as you do now? And most times the answer is no, I didn't. Why? Because you didn't need as much to feel the impact or um, in- the degree of euphoria. You didn't need as much then because your body wasn't accustomed to it. But the more you use, the more you need. And again, withdrawal, they may not experience anxiety, they may not experience shakes, sweats, nausea, or vomiting from the lack of their use of marijuana. However, the lack of appetite and irritability are definitely withdrawal signs from marijuana. um, Negative consequences, continuing to use the drug in spite of getting in trouble, and because you had a positive urine when you dropped for your probation officer. um, Negativity in your mood, uh, your health is failing, or you're having trouble going to work, keeping a little job, not being able to develop a work ethic, you're having problems in the family, but in spite of these negative consequences, that person continues to smoke. That's a sign of dependence. Putting off or neglecting activities, the social activities, educational, recreational, work, going to work, household activities suffer because of your use of marijuana. Do you spend significant time or emotional energy obtaining, using, concealing, planning, recovering from your use, thinking about using, or scheming to avoid getting caught? And we can apply some of these to our eating habits, but we won't go there today. Maybe I'll come back and do a workshop on, I did this a couple of years ago. My friend food is turning on me. So y'all keep your eyes open for that. And having a desire to cut down, and made unsuccessful attempts to cut down even when it was necessary because of negative consequences. And so that's just some of the signs of dependence. All right. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, Geneva and Andrea, Felicia. Good evening. Good to see you all on here. We're going to get ready to wrap it up. So if you have any questions, now is the time to drop them in the chat. We had our commercial for Mary Lewis and her Mary Kay products. You all make sure you grab that number on the playback and give Mary a call. She is an independent Mary Kay consultant, and she also sells hankies. Some of you may want a nice little lace trimmed hanky, and so we're going to give a shout out to her. Elder Michelle Spencer, I don't know if you all caught that commercial. So we're going to show Elder Michelle's commercial again before we get out of here. And I want to make sure you know that you can get my book, Toxic Relationships, Another Addiction. Is it love, or are you just thirsty? You can get that on Amazon.com. So let's go to Elder Michelle's commercial. Elder Michelle has a book that that she wrote, Lost in the Church. And so we'll take a look at that. And she also has products that we saw in the previous commercial. Let's take a look at Elder Michelle's commercial, and I'll be right back with you.
Elder Michelle is a sponsor of Straight Up No Chaser. I thank all of our sponsors for making Straight Up No Chaser possible. And we're going to get ready to get on out of here. Um, I'll keep a watch out for your comments. If you're watching this on Saturday, you're watching a playback. And so I'll keep a watch out for the comments, try to answer your comments in the chat. And until we meet again, look out for Straight Up No Chaser for the next month on Wednesdays at 6:30. And then if the Lord says the same, I'll see you on Wednesday. God bless.